Welcome to Debt Free in 30, the show where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. I'm Doug Hoyes. Today, my guest happens to be an expert in all of those areas, so I think we're going to have a good show, get lots of practical advice and lots of insight. So let's get started. Who are you? What do you do? And what makes you an expert in debt, money, and personal finance?
My name is David Trahair. I'm a chartered professional accountant. I run my own sole proprietorship accounting practice in North York. I've been doing this for a couple of decades now or longer. So my day job really is a chartered professional accountant dealing with small businesses. But I've also written 5 books related to personal finance, including the one we're talking about today, Crushing Debt. And really, I've gotten into the subject of personal finance and debt out of personal interest. I wrote my first book in 2003, really out of personal interest because I was fascinated by this subject of how much will you need to retire? Is it better to pay off debt or make an RSP contribution and that kind of stuff? But basically, the day job is still public accounting. I'm not an investment advisor. I'm not a trustee in bankruptcy or anything. Just a logical accountant trying to make sense of the world. A
logical accountant. There you go. So that's good because it means you really don't have an axe to grind here. You're not trying to sell us a specific product. Your advice is hopefully as unbiased as it can be. So you mentioned your book. So let's talk about that. And you've written 5 of them. We're going to pick on one of them today. And the title of the book is Crushing Debt: Why Canadians Should Drop Everything and Pay Off Debt. And I'm holding it up to the microphone, which is really bad radio, but there it is. Now, I've read the book. I understand, where you're coming from, but I think from the title, it's pretty obvious where you're coming from. You're saying that debt is crushing and that Canadians should drop everything and pay off debt. So I guess if I was a really good interviewer, I'd start off with some softball questions to get you loosened up, and then I'd come in with the real hard-hitting questions. But since this isn't 60 minutes, let me just hit you with the hard-hitting question right off the bat, and that is that really true? I mean, is debt really a problem? And obviously, I have a show called Debt Free in 30, and so obviously I'm encouraging people to get out of debt as well. But let's think about this here. If I bought a house 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and if I mortgaged it to the hilt, bought way more house than I could reasonably afford, I had a variable rate mortgage, I'd be sitting here today in February of 2015 laughing my head off because my house price has probably gone up and my mortgage rate is certainly lower today than it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So it's all great. Debt for me in that scenario has been fantastic. So Why are you advocating the exact opposite? Why are you saying that debt should be lower, not higher?
Good question. Well, first of all, the title is supposed to be read either way. Either debt can be crushing you or you can crush your debt. So it's meant to be sort of a double-edged sort of title. The other issue is when you talk about real estate doing well and not people not being too worried about mortgage levels. Well, we're in Canada, and the housing market has been great here. But if you were in the United States and you were heavily leveraged like many Americans were before the meltdown of 2008, 2009, you would be of a different opinion. A lot of Americans, I think the statistic currently is about 25% of Americans' single-family dwellings with a mortgage are underwater. Their houses are still worth less than the mortgage on them. Now, very different market. Canadians seem to be more prudent financially generally than Americans. I mean, you can make a good argument that the American dream is debt-financed, right? Mm-hmm. You can have anything you want because debt allows you to do that. And people bought into that dream, fueled also by the fact that within certain levels, interest on your mortgage is tax deductible in the States. So why would you ever pay it off? It's the best tax break around. So again, debt is not a bad thing, definitely. Within reason, debt allows us to live a wonderful life. But if you go overboard, it can be a total disaster, as it has in the United States. I'm not saying that's going to happen in Canada, but we have to be wary of the fact, for example, that the housing market doesn't always go up. I mean, even the Bank of Canada recently said that it believes housing prices in Canada are overstated by as much as 30%. I'm not sure I believe that. But the warning is, don't assume that the good times are always going to last, because if you live on a daily basis assuming that everything that's good that's happening now is going to continue forever, and therefore you keep increasing your debt, you may be setting yourself up for a major problem later on.
So what you're talking about is what the psychologists would call normalcy bias. I assume that, interest rates have been going down for 20 years. I guess they'll just keep going down for another 20 years. House prices have gone up for the last probably again 20 years, and therefore it will continue. But you give the example of the United States, where obviously that hasn't been the case. And if your stats are right, and you're probably certainly in the ballpark, that a quarter of the people down there own a house that has a mortgage more than what the house is worth, that's certainly a warning sign. I guess the Canadian example would be what's happening out west right now, Fort McMurray, for example. So you've got people who bought the house prices just kept going up and up and up as the oil price went up. And in 2014, oil prices are $100 a barrel. It's all great.
Exactly.
And here we sit early in 2015, and obviously we're under $50. So that's really what you're worried about then. It's not that it's been a problem right yet today, it's the future. That's really the worry.
Exactly. And if you get down to a more personal level, I've always been of the opinion that retiring totally debt-free, including the mortgage, is the best way to go into retirement. Because if you can do that, it means that your expenses after you retire are going to be significantly less. Like take out your mortgage payment that you currently got. That means you need to have much less money coming in to stay in your house. Now, the trick is that retiring totally debt-free takes work. It basically forces you to be fiscally responsible, because to pay off debt, you have to spend less than you make, which is difficult to do. So a lot of people today are using the ultra-low interest rates as an excuse to not worry about their debt levels. So they'll have a mortgage that they're paying down, but they'll go and take out a home equity line of credit and continue to spend more than they make, running up the balance of that line of credit. By saying, well, interest rates are low, this is easy to afford, not really thinking that, well, if your objective is to get debt-free, you're going in the wrong direction. How do you turn things around?
Well, and you just wrote an article that was published in CPA Magazine, I believe it's called, in January, that you addressed the whole line of credit issue as part of that article.
Right.
You see that as a big issue then?
Well, I think so. I mean, the big problem, I think, and TransUnion used to have great media releases on this, is that people tend to start with credit card debt. It's easy to spend more than you make when you run up credit card debt. Then they don't like the fact that it's charging them 18% interest, so they go out and take out a home equity line of credit at prime, 3%. The banks last month just dropped it to 2.75. And they shift high interest rate debt to a low interest rate, which is fine. But if they continue their ways and spend more than they make and then run up the credit card debt again, they're left with like twice as much debt, half at a low rate and half at the high rate. So that can backfire, this debt consolidation idea.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. Lines of credit sound good, but they only make sense if your total debt level is going down. I pay off my credit cards with my line of credit, and then I rack up my credit cards again, I'm actually worse off as a result of that, which I think was the point you were making. And what I'll do is I'll put in the show notes links to the stuff we're talking about today, including links to your books and links to that article so people can read it. So the title of the book, Crushing Debt, Why Canadians Should Drop Everything and Pay Off Debt. So tell me what you mean by drop everything. What does that mean?
What I mean by that is that obviously it's a question between should I save or should I pay off debt? So extreme example. If we have somebody who has a revolving credit card debt, and a revolver is somebody who can't afford to pay off their credit card balance and therefore pays a lot of interest on that balance. We have a revolver that has credit card debt charging interest at 18%, and they've started a tax-free savings account making 3%. That makes no logical sense whatsoever. They think they're saving, but they're actually getting in worse shape because the alternative would be to pay down that credit card debt at a high interest rate. So the drop everything means, look, think about stopping to, quote, save in a TFSA, possibly stop making RSP contributions, and instead focus on paying off your debt. Because beginning with the end in mind, as I said earlier, retiring totally debt-free is I would argue, the best position to be in. If you live in your house mortgage-free, you've got no ugly consumer debt, that means the cash outflow requirements are much lower than somebody who's going into retirement with debt. I mean, some people are just on track for total disaster. People who have a big mortgage, line of credit, they also have consumer debt. Once they retire and their income goes down significantly, how do you maintain that lifestyle? I just don't see that.
It's pretty much impossible. Well, and you make a good point that it's better to have low expenses than high income and high expenses. You can certainly weather the storm a lot better. Well, that's very good advice. We're going to take a quick break here, and we will be right back to talk more with David Trahair. You're listening to Debt Free in 30.
What are the warning signs of debt problems? Where can I find a free online debt options calculator? Where can I get free ebooks and guides? Find all the answers at moneyproblems.ca, the website for Canadians with money problems who want money solutions. Moneyproblems.ca.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back to Debt Free in 30. I'm Doug Hoyes, and my guest today is David Trahair, a chartered accountant and a CPA. He's also the author of 5 books, and today we're talking about one of those books, which is Crushing Debt: Why Canadians Should Drop Everything and Pay Off Debt. So, David, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the ways to get out of debt. You go through this in detail in your book in Chapter 7. You explain a bunch of techniques, so I'm going to start by throwing them at you, and perhaps you can give me your thoughts on them. And your first one, and I think I agree with you, it's definitely the place to start, is pay it off yourself. So Walk us through that process. Obviously, it's not as simple as me just writing a check and paying it off, or else I wouldn't be in this situation. How do I get started?
I say that the first thing people should do, and I know many people won't do this because it's boring and it's tedious, but it should start with tracking where your money's gone in the past. I do it using Microsoft Excel, and it's very easy now with the advent of internet banking. You can go on to your main bank and download your credit card information for the last year and your main bank account information for the last year. And then if you're proficient with spreadsheets, it's very easy to sort that information. For people who aren't technically inclined, I encourage them to maybe just do it for 1 month. Just take 1 month's of expenses from your main personal bank account and your credit card and just see where the money's gone in the past.
So let's start with the spreadsheet thing, because you and I both happen to be CAs, CPAs, and we're numbers guys, and I do it exactly the same way, I must confess. Okay. I go onto my online banking, I hit the download or the export button, and it dumps me all the transactions in either a CSV file or an Excel file. And you're right, you suck it into a spreadsheet, and then you can make columns for each of the different categories.
Exactly.
Food, rent, hydro, gas, whatever. And you're right, it's not that hard. There aren't that many transactions in a month. Oh, Union Gas, I guess that goes in the gas category.
Exactly.
And so then you can see where it's going. If people don't want to do that, obviously there's other software out there that can do that for you as well. But you're saying, okay, let's start small here. Do it for 1 month.
Right.
And even if you have to use a piece of paper and a pencil, I guess that's better than nothing.
Exactly.
What should I do at the end of the month then? So I've got all this list of everywhere I spent my money on. Then what's next?
Well, the first thing that you need to determine is whether you're spending more than you make. And a lot of people, they think of how much they earn from their job before taxes. They don't factor in taxes, CPP, and EI. Your take-home pay is what's important because that's the money you've got to pay your expenses. And a lot of people are offside. A lot of people that will do that procedure for a month will see, oh, I'm spending X hundreds of dollars more than I'm bringing in. And that, obviously, they're offside, and that's going to lead to problems.
They're offside because they're using credit cards to do that.
That's the problem. These days, credit cards are so easy to get now. If you've got a half-decent credit rating, very easy to apply for a credit card online. Previous generations didn't have that access, right? So personal finances used to be a lot easier. You had a bank account. The only debt you could get was a reasonable mortgage on a house. Your paycheck got deposited into your bank account, and that's the amount of money you had to spend. If you ran out, that was it. You couldn't spend any more. Now, with credit card limits being quite high, it's very easy for people to spend hundreds, thousands of dollars more than they make every month. And obviously, that's a downward slope, a disaster.
And you don't even know it because my credit card balances are going up every month.
Exactly. That's the result. But the cause is they're spending more than they make. And the problem is most people are not going to do what we just recommended because nobody's forcing them to do that. The government doesn't say you have to track your personal spending. You got to track your business spending for tax purposes, but not your personal. So most people don't do it.
So your recommendation is to start with crunch the numbers, figure out where your money's going. Then what?
Yeah. Then if you had this listing, then you could identify where the big cash drains are. People might have an idea of where the money's going, but to see it on paper and to see, last month on restaurants, we spent, $1,500. I thought we were spending less than $800 on that. Then you can target areas where you can cut your expenses. And I think the good news is that a lot of people will find a lot of their spending is discretionary. They don't have to spend that, and therefore it's possible to cut it back. Won't be easy. It's painful to cut back things like going out to restaurants. But without that information, it's very difficult to make good strides.
So in your experience, most people are able to cover their rent no problem. It's not the mortgage payment that's the big issue. It's everything else, what you call discretionary spending, meaning I have discretion. I could either spend it or not. And examples of that, you gave us one example, which would be, going out to restaurants. I don't have to do that every day. What are some other examples of discretionary items that perhaps would be areas where I could cut back in?
Good question. One of the areas I find for a lot of people is vacations. Going on vacation, especially if you've got a number of kids, if it involves flights, very expensive. Worthwhile, and something that makes life worth living is going on vacation with your family, but within reason, right? Clothing is another area that people often go overboard. I think the key thing is the relationship in the family. I mean, if we have a couple that are both cheap, tightwad accountants like us, they're probably not going to have too many problems with debt. The biggest problem they're going to have is, they're going to die with millions of dollars in the bank. That's not a big problem to have. So if you have one prudently fiscal person with somebody who's a spender, there's going to be a lot of tension there. If you have two spenders, this is, I would guess, a lot of the people that you see is because they've got people that are they can't control their spending.
And so it starts with knowing where the money goes. And when you see it in black and white in front of you, then you can actually start taking some steps to address it.
Exactly.
And that's the first step then. I've got to get my monthly spending down below what my income is, or else I'm just going deeper and deeper into debt. So let's say I do that then. It takes some hard work. I've got to, spend more time planning meals so I can cook at home rather than going out for dinner. We're going to still take vacations, but they're going to be driving vacations, a little bit closer to home rather than flying to the other side of the world. We're going to make some changes. We're now in a position where there's more money coming in than going out, but I've still got all this debt sitting there from the past.
Right.
So what's my thought process next then? What do I do about that?
Okay, good question. I think strategy number one for people with high interest rate credit card debt is to shop around for a balance transfer offer. I mean, they can just Google credit card balance transfer and find another financial institution willing to take that credit card debt over. And it depends on the environment and how interested the new company is in getting new business. So sometimes you might get a credit card balance transfer offer 3% for 6 months. Other times I've seen offers that's 0% for a year. So the key is if you've got your spending under control and you're destined or focused on paying it down, that is a great strategy. You go from 18% down to 0 or 3% without having to tap into home equity line of credit. But the key is you've changed your behavior and you're not going to run up the balance again. And I think that's why these credit card balance transfers are offered, is because the new credit card granting company that's going to give you the break knows that most people are unlikely to change their habits.
And that's really the key then. You've got to actually change your habits, and that's how you start grinding down the expenses, and that's how you can then start taking steps to get out of debt.
That's it.
Great. Yeah. I appreciate that, David. Thank you very much for joining me. We're going to come right back to wrap it up right here on Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back.
If debt problems are keeping you up at night, if collection calls leave you afraid to answer the phone, it's time to end the cycle. You can do something about your debt. Call Hoyes Michaelis today at 310-PLAN.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. My guest today was David Trahair, a chartered professional accountant and the author of 5 books, including Crushing Debt: Why Canadians Should Drop Everything and Pay Off Debt, who made the point that debt may not appear to be a problem here in Canada because we didn't have the same credit implosion that Americans did, but just because we haven't had a severe debt crisis yet does not mean that one won't happen in the future. The housing market does not always go up, so being over-mortgaged is a risk. David's advice is to pay off debt now because the best way to go into retirement is debt-free. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what's my take on David's message? I agree with David's point that retiring debt-free is a very important goal. If you retire with debt, whether it's a mortgage, car loan, or credit card debt, a portion of your income must go to debt servicing costs, and that leaves less money to live on. You don't want to be in a position where you are forced to work in retirement to earn enough money to service your debt. That only makes sense. If I have a $1,000 mortgage payment when I retire, my pensions and other retirement income need to be $1,000 higher to achieve the same standard of living as I could achieve if I was debt-free. Of course, as David said, retiring debt-free takes work, and it probably means you have to live a more frugal life today so you have less debt tomorrow. It's up to each of us to balance out our desire to spend money today and with our need to save for the future. David's point is that debt isn't a problem until it is. As David said on the show, he's heard statistics that say that as many as 25% of Americans are underwater on their mortgages. That's a staggering statistic, and it proves the point that too much debt is very dangerous, and you don't want to use debt to finance a lifestyle you can't afford. That's our show for today. This show is on the radio every week and also available on our website and on iTunes. So please go to hoys.com for a full list of participating radio stations and details on how you can download the show to listen on your iPod or smartphone. Full show notes are available on our website, and you can contact the show by email at dfi30@hoys.com. That's dfi30@hoys.com. Or you can leave your comments right on our website at hoys.com. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoys. That was Debt Free in 30.
Looking for information on budgeting, debt consolidation, credit counseling, debt management, and debt settlement? For unbiased advice, go to moneyproblems.ca, the website for Canadians with money problems who want money solutions. moneyproblems.ca.